The rain was a constant, a dull thrum against the corrugated tin roof of my makeshift office. It had been a while since the polished wood and hushed corridors of the precinct felt like mine. Now, only the smell of stale coffee and desperation clung to these peeling walls. My hands, once steady on a service weapon, trembled slightly as I traced the faded outline of a photograph. Him, always him, the ghost that haunted my waking hours and whispered through my dreams. A sharp rap on the door, too insistent for a casual visitor, jolted me. My knuckles, calloused and scarred, clenched the edge of the desk. "It's open," I grunted, my voice rough from disuse. The door creaked inward, revealing a figure silhouetted against the dim glow of the street lamp outside. A colleague, his trench coat slick with rain, his face etched with a weariness I knew all too well. He didn't waste pleasantries. "Cole," he began, stepping inside, the scent of ozone and damp wool filling the air. "They found another one, or rather they found the place where another one happened." I didn't need him to elaborate. The cadence of his voice, the carefully chosen words, they were a language I understood, a language of dread. My gaze drifted back to the photograph, to the intricate patterns of the killer's work, patterns I'd spent years trying to decipher. "Same Mo?" I asked, my voice a low murmur. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine, a silent acknowledgement of the shared burden. Identical, the precision, the artistic touch, the way they bypassed every security measure like it was a child's puzzle. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And the victim, found perfectly posed. This wasn't just a copycat, this was a resurrection. The ghost I'd buried, the one I'd sworn to keep interred, was clawing its way back to the surface." "Where?" I asked, pushing myself up from the chair, cheap wood groaning in protest. "The old industrial district, the Sterling warehouses." Sterling. I remembered the Sterling case like a fresh wound. It had been my white whale, my undoing. The case that had stripped me of my badge, my reputation, and a piece of my soul. "They're calling it a robbery," my colleague continued, his voice tight. "But the only thing missing is nothing substantial. A few valuable pieces, yes, but nothing that explains the scale of the operation. It's like a performance piece." A performance piece, that was it, that was his signature. The killer wasn't after wealth, he was after attention. And the timing, I pressed, my mind already racing, piecing together fragmented memories, discarded theories. Just before dawn, the patrols missed it, like always. Like always. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusation. The system had failed then, and it was failing now. I was the loose end, the disgraced detective with nothing left to lose, the only one who might still have the nerve to chase a phantom. "I'll need to see the scene," I stated, not as a request, but as a command. My colleague hesitated, his gaze flicking to the worn photograph on my desk. "Cole, the brass. They're not happy about this. They want to handle it internally. They don't want I involved." I met his gaze, a flicker of the old fire igniting in my eyes. "They don't know him like I do. They don't see the pattern. They're looking for a thief. I'm looking for a monster." I walked towards the door, the rain drumming a relentless rhythm, a soundtrack to my resurgence. "Tell them I'm already on it." The drive to the Sterling warehouses was a blur of flashing lights and the metallic scent of the rain. Police tape, a garish yellow against the muted tones of the night, cordoned off the entrance. Uniformed officers stood like stoic sentinels, their faces grim. My colleague flashed his badge and the tape was lifted. The air inside was thick with the cloying sweetness of decay and something else, something metallic and sharp. The stench of old machinery mingled with the fainter, more disturbing aroma of formaldehyde. The crime scene investigators, their faces hidden behind masks, moved with a quiet efficiency, their movements precise and measured. I walked through the cavernous space, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The floor was a mosaic of oil stains and grime. In the center of the main hall, under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, was the tableau. The victim, a man dressed in an expensive suit, lay sprawled on the floor. His eyes were wide open, staring at the unseen ceiling, and on his chest, nestled against the crisp fabric of his shirt, was a single, pristine white orchid. A wave of nausea washed over me, a visceral reaction to the sickening familiarity. It was him. The phantom had returned, and this time I wouldn't let him escape. I wouldn't let him claim another life. The ghost that had haunted me for years was no longer a memory. It was a present danger, and I was the only one who could stop it. Later, under the bruised pre-dawn sky, a discreet call brought me to the edge of town. A private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The only illumination came from the distant glow of the city and the erratic flicker of the landing lights on a small, sleek jet. The hum of its engines was a low thrum against the damp air, a promise of escape. A single figure, cloaked in the shadow of the aircraft's wing, beckoned me forward. This was not the killer's work, not directly. This was a consequence. This was the aftermath, and it was as intricate, as carefully orchestrated as the murders themselves. The phantom was not just a killer. He was a puppet master, and his strings reached further than I had ever imagined. The Sterling warehouse reeked of stale oil and something else, something sharp and acrid that scraped the back of my throat. My flashlight beam, a nervous tremor in my hand, danced over the scene. Cops, uniformed and plain-clothed, swarmed the cavernous space like ants on spilled sugar. I recognized a few faces, ghosts from my past life, their expressions a mixture of professional detachment and grim fascination. Cole, a gruff voice cut through the din. The detective, a broad-shouldered man whose name I'd never bothered to learn, stood by a chalk outline that was less a drawing and more a suggestion of absence. Didn't expect to see you crawling out from under your rock. I ignored the jab, my gaze fixed on the floor. No blood, not really. A few dark, viscous splatters, but nothing that told a story. The precision of it all, that's what gnawed at me. The way the crates were stacked, forming a near-impenetrable barrier around the shattered vault. The meticulous placement of the disabled security cameras. It wasn't brute force, it was elegant, too elegant. "What happened here?" I asked, my voice a low rumble rough from disuse. "Vault's clean," the detective grunted, kicking a loose shard of metal. "Took everything, and they were in and out like a phantom. No witnesses, no fingerprints, not a single damn trace." He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Except for this." He gestured to a small metallic object lying near the vault door. I knelt, my knees protesting the cold concrete. It was a cufflink, ornate with a tiny, almost imperceptible engraving. I traced the intricate pattern with my fingertip. It was familiar, sickeningly so. I didn't answer, my mind already miles away, back in the suffocating stillness of my small apartment, surrounded by case files and the ghosts of faces I couldn't save. The cufflink was a signature, a cruel, taunting echo. "Just a trinket," I finally said, pushing myself up. "Probably dropped by one of the security guards." He grunted again, unconvinced, but didn't press. I knew my reputation, the disgraced detective. They tolerated me for now. I moved away, my flashlight beam sweeping over the remaining contents of the warehouse. Nothing seemed out of place, no discarded tools, no dropped weapons. Just the sterile, empty space where wealth had once resided. But the air still hummed with a stolen energy, a silent testament to the efficiency of the perpetrators. My eyes caught on a scuff mark near a loading bay door, faint but distinct. It was a unique tread pattern, unlike anything I'd seen on standard work boots. I crouched again, examining it closely. It was a deliberate mark, almost as if it had been left intentionally. A breadcrumb, or just another dead end. I stood, the weight of it all pressing down on me. This wasn't just a heist. This was a performance, a carefully choreographed dance of destruction and acquisition, and the music was a melody I knew too well. "I'm heading out," I told the detective, not looking back. He scoffed. "Where are you going? Back to your hole?" I didn't reply. My destination wasn't a hole, but a place that held its own secrets, a place where the air tasted of freedom and the future. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick with a greasy sheen. I drove, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon. My old car, a relic of a more hopeful time, rattled and groaned with every mile. I needed answers, and the official channels, with their endless bureaucracy and polite dismissals, wouldn't provide them. My gut twisted with a familiar unease. This was a mistake, I knew it. Getting involved again, wading back into the muck, but the cufflink, the tread mark. I couldn't ignore them, not this time. I found myself on a deserted stretch of highway, the kind that led nowhere and everywhere. The sky was a bruised purple, the stars hidden behind a veil of clouds. Then I saw it. I steered the car off the main road, bumping along a rutted dirt track. The glow intensified, resolving into the steady thrum of an engine. It was a plane. A small private jet parked on a makeshift runway, its engines already running, a silent invitation to escape. The air here was thick with the scent of aviation fuel, sharp and potent. This was it. The exit, the escape route. Someone was leaving, and fast. My heart, a traitorous organ, picked up its pace. This was too convenient, too perfect. A setup, perhaps. But a setup for whom and why? Tall, lean, moving with an unnerving grace. The engines roared, a hungry beast awakening. This was my chance, a gamble, but one I had to take. The past was a relentless tide, and I was about to dive back in. My old car, a relic of a more hopeful era, coughed and sputtered, a familiar complaint. It was a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. A small, sleek jet, its silhouette a dark shard against the bruised twilight sky, waited. The man who met me was a shadow with sharp edges, his face obscured by the brim of a fedora. He didn't offer a hand, just a curt nod. "Cole, you're late." His voice was a low rumble like distant thunder. "Traffic," I said, the lie tasting like ash. I never lied to this man, not usually. But the truth was a tangled knot of fear and desperation I couldn't yet unravel. "The package is ready," he continued, ignoring my excuse. He gestured towards the jet. "Your passage." I looked at the jet, then back at him. "What's the price this time?" My voice was rough, unpracticed. It had been too long since I'd dealt in this currency, and my unique skills. The news is already buzzing. Another one, bigger this time. My gut twisted. Bigger. The old gantry warehouse. Security was minimal. They knew exactly where to hit. He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the damp air. And how? I didn't need him to finish. The meticulous precision, the surgical efficiency, it was a signature I knew too well. The ghost of a past I'd tried to bury clawed at my throat. The same M.O. Identical, the stranger confirmed. Down to the last detail. The disabling of the cameras, the bypass of the alarm systems, the specific tools used. It's him, Cole, or someone who's been studying him very, very closely. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, picturing the scene. The gantry warehouse. A behemoth of rust and neglect, filled with crates of, what? Contraband, stolen art. The specifics of the cargo never mattered as much as the audacity of the theft. This wasn't about the goods, a calling card of sorts. My eyes snapped open. What? A single black orchid placed precisely in the center of the empty display case. A black orchid, he was back, or a terrifying echo had risen from the ashes of my failure, and they're looking for anyone with relevant experience. My experience, the very thing that had broken me. Now it was the only thing that could save others. The irony was a bitter draught. "I need to see the scene," I stated, my voice firming with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. The stranger hesitated. "That's not advisable. You're not officially on this. Not anymore." "Advisable or not, I'm going," I countered, my gaze locking with his. The faint glow from the jet's cabin illuminated the hard set of his jaw. He knew I wouldn't be deterred. My obsession, my curse, was now my only weapon. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "The jet is yours, then. Fly safe, Cole, and try not to get yourself killed. The world, it seems, still needs your brand of insight." I didn't reply. I walked towards the jet, the cold metal of its fuselage a stark contrast to the heat building within me. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running, was a portal. One door was closing on my past. Another, infinitely more dangerous, was swinging wide open. The black orchid, it was a challenge, a taunt. And I, Cole, the disgraced detective, the failed hunter, would answer. I had to get to that warehouse. I had to see the orchid. I had to know if the ghost was real, or if a new demon had learned to wear its mask. The low thrum of the jet's engines vibrated through the soles of my worn boots. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running, was a stage set for a departure or perhaps an arrival. The air tasted of jet fuel and something else, something metallic and sharp like ozone before a storm. I climbed the portable stairs, each step a deliberate ascent away from the ground, away from the familiar. The cabin was a sterile cocoon, the pilot a silhouette against the faint glow of the instrument panel. He didn't speak. I didn't expect him to. The black orchid, it was more than just a calling card. It was a signature, a taunt. The first heist, the diamond exchange, the jewels vanished as if by sleight of hand. The second, a secure vault holding rare art, the same impossible precision. And now the informants whisper about a third, a data center, its servers holding secrets that could cripple a nation. The common thread wasn't the value of the take, but the sheer audacity, the surgical removal of the target with no trace left behind. My mind replayed the case that had broken me. The butcher, they'd called him, his victims, meticulous, almost clinical. He'd left no fingerprints, no witnesses, just a single dried black orchid tucked into the palm of each. I'd chased shadows for months, my career dissolving like sugar in rain. And now this echo. The pilot angled the aircraft. Below, the city lights blurred into streaks of molten gold. I pulled out the slim file, its edges softened with use. Photographs of the orchid. The way it was placed, always with the stem pointing north. A detail so small, so absurd, I'd almost dismissed it then. But the informant had mentioned it again. North, he'd rasped, his voice a dry rustle. Always north. My knuckles brushed the glossy paper. The diamond exchange was downtown, its main vault facing due north. The art gallery a more complex structure, but the targeted wing, the one housing the stolen pieces, had its primary facade oriented precisely on that compass point. And the data center. I'd pulled up the blueprints myself, a frantic late-night dive into public records. The main server room, the heart of the operation, was a perfect rectangle, its longest axis aligned with the magnetic north. This wasn't coincidence. This was a deliberate mirroring, but why? The butcher was a killer. These were thieves. The motive felt off. Greed was too simple, too blunt for this level of artistry. There was a message here, a narrative being woven, and I was somehow being drawn into its loom. The pilot announced our descent. The engine noise shifted, a deeper growl as we bled altitude. We were heading towards a discreet landing strip, closer to the data center than any commercial airport. The informant had provided coordinates, a meeting point miles from the city's neon glare. My past was a phantom limb, an ache that never truly subsided. The butcher's face, a blur in my memory, was beginning to sharpen, to coalesce with the phantom menace of these new heists. Was it him? Or someone who knew him, someone who had studied his work, twisted his sick art into something new, something even more dangerous. The landing gear deployed with a shudder. The ground rushed up to meet us. The pilot killed the engines. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant chirping of unseen insects. I stepped out onto the tarmac, the air still and heavy. The file felt like a lead weight in my hand. The orchid, north, the data center. It was all too precise, too calculated. The informant had promised information, a link to the orchestrator of these crimes. I scanned the perimeter, the dense, unyielding trees pressing in on all sides. Nothing moved. No one spoke. My instincts, honed by years of wading through the muck, screamed caution. This felt like a trap. But the alternative, the thought of these heists continuing, of the potential damage they could inflict, gnawed at me. The butcher had left a trail of bodies. This new ghost was leaving a trail of empty vaults and compromised systems. What was the end game? My hand instinctively went to the small of my back, where the weight of my old service weapon used to rest. It was gone, replaced by a phantom ache. I was Cole, a man chasing ghosts, a man who had failed once. The chill of the night air bit at my exposed skin, a familiar sting that always seemed to precede a storm, both literal and figurative. My fingers, still slick with the residue of that cheap diner coffee, traced the lines on the crumpled map. North. Always north. It was a constant, a grim anchor in the swirling chaos of memory and present danger. The Diamond Exchange, the art gallery, the data center, each a meticulously carved notch in the timeline, each pointing to a singular, unnerving truth. I'd reached the data center's blueprints just as the rain began to fall, fat, heavy drops splattering against the grimy window of my borrowed office. The main server room, the heart of the operation, was tucked away in the sub-basement, accessible only through a reinforced service tunnel. And that tunnel, according to the faded schematics, opened directly onto the city's old industrial canal. A canal that, if one followed its serpentine path far enough, emptied into the marshlands bordering the abandoned airfield. The airfield, a place I hadn't dared to revisit in years, a place where the echoes of sirens and desperate pleas still clung to the damp earth. My phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion into the quiet hum of my thoughts. A burner, this one. From a contact I hadn't heard from in months, a ghost from my former life, a man who knew the shadowed corners of this city better than anyone. His message was terse, devoid of pleasantries. Southwest Quadrant, tonight, urgent. Southwest Quadrant, that put him near the docks, the very labyrinth I'd been avoiding. But the urgency in his tone, the coded brevity, sent a shiver down my spine. He wouldn't reach out unless the stakes were impossibly high. And given the current circumstances, impossibly high felt like the baseline. I pulled my jacket tighter, the worn leather a meager shield against the encroaching damp. The air here was thick with the smell of brine, decaying wood, and something else. Something metallic and sharp like old blood. My contact was waiting, a silhouette against the dull glow of a distant, flickering lamp. He was a man of few words, his face a roadmap of hard living, etched with scars that spoke of battles fought and lost. He nodded as I approached, eyes sharp and observant, scanning the empty expanse around us. "They're moving," he rasped, his voice like gravel. Tonight, the rain had intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm on the metal rooftops. He gestured with a callous thumb towards the inky blackness of the water. "The cargo, smuggled, but not just any cargo. The signature is there, the precision, the theatricality." He spat the word out like a curse. "Who?" My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The heists, the methods, the north-pointing facades, and now this, smuggled cargo. It was all a grotesque echo of the past. A name I haven't heard in years, my contact said, his gaze fixed on the churning water. Someone who thought they were buried, someone who knew how he worked, knew him intimately. My blood turned to ice water. "Who?" I demanded again, my voice raw. He turned to me then, his eyes holding a flicker of something akin to pity. "The Nightingale, the Nightingale." The moniker sent a jolt through me, a phantom pain from a wound that had never truly healed. It was the name whispered in hushed tones, the name associated with the killer I'd hunted, the killer I'd failed to catch. The one who had vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of meticulously orchestrated devastation. "That's impossible," I breathed, the words catching in my throat. "He's gone, years ago." "People like that don't just disappear, Cole," my contact said, his voice grim. "They just find new stages. Not a gunshot, but something heavier, a splintering of wood." My contact swore under his breath, his hand instinctively going to the inside of his jacket. "We've been made," he hissed. He was tall, lean, and moved with an unnerving grace. He held a long, slender object in his hand, something that glinted dully. "Cole," a voice purred, low and smooth like the rustle of silk. It was a voice I remembered, a voice that had haunted my nightmares. Always sniffing around where you don't belong. My breath hitched. The Nightingale, it couldn't be, he was supposed to be. "Gone, you're not him," I said, my voice shaking, betraying the resolve I tried to project. The figure chuckled, a sound devoid of mirth. "Oh, but I am, or rather, I carry the torch. A legacy, if you will. And tonight, Cole, you've stumbled into the grand finale." He raised the object in his hand. He swung it with surprising speed, aiming for my contact. My contact dodged, a grunt of effort escaping him, but the crowbar caught him a glancing blow on the shoulder. He stumbled back, clutching his arm. "Run, Cole," he yelled, his voice strained. "Get out of here." But I couldn't, not yet, the heists. It was all connected. I saw a glint of metal near the figure's hip, a familiar shape. A lock-picking set, the same intricate tools used in the heists. "You're behind this," I accused, my voice rising above the din of the rain. "The heists, they were my dear Cole, this is the symphony, and you, my friend, are merely an unfortunate discord." He lunged again, the crowbar whistling through the air. I scrambled back, my heart racing, a desperate primal rhythm. I tripped over a loose plank, falling hard onto the wet ground. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my arm. As I looked up, I saw him standing over me, the crowbar raised. A roar, deafening and powerful, filled the air. The unmistakable sound of a prop plane's engine revving to life. He hesitated, his head snapping towards the noise. The light intensified, illuminating the runway of a nearby, previously unseen private airstrip, no lights, engine running. A small twin-engine plane sat at the far end, its propellers a blur. I pushed myself up, my body aching, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead. My contact was gone too, vanished into the labyrinthine maze of the docks. The only evidence of our encounter was the lingering scent of salt and fear, and the deafening roar of the departing plane. I had confronted him, or a shadow of him, and he had vanished, leaving me with more questions than answers. The Nightingale was back, and he was orchestrating something far grander, far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. And I, the disgraced detective, was more lost than ever, a pawn in a game I barely understood, played on a board I couldn't see. The setback was profound, a crushing weight of failure settling over me. I had come seeking answers, and I had found only the echo of my past, amplified and more dangerous than before. The crowbar's descent was a blur of glinting metal, a sound that ripped through the night's hushed symphony of distant waves. I twisted, a clumsy, desperate maneuver, and felt the rough wood of a rotten plank splinter beneath my palms. The fall was a brutal punctuation mark to my evasion, a sharp jab of agony shooting up my arm. My breath hitched, tasting of brine and something metallic, something that might have been my own fear. He loomed, a silhouette against the bruised twilight, the crowbar held ready. His face, lost in shadow, was a mask of grim intent. But it wasn't his features that froze me. It was the methodical way he moved, the unnerving stillness in his posture, the practiced economy of his threat. It was a ghost I knew intimately, a rhythm I'd spent years trying to forget. "I shouldn't have come here, Cole." The stranger's voice rasped, low and guttural like stones grinding together. My mind, a frantic, overloaded circuit, struggled to reconcile the scene. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. The precision of the heists, the chilling echo of the Ripper's signature, it all coalesced into a terrifying certainty. He was here, the Ripper was here, and he was looking at me. I pushed myself up, ignoring the dull throb in my arm, my gaze locked on the figure before me. I read him. A low chuckle, devoid of humor, vibrated in the cavernous space. Him, such a dramatic label. I am merely an artist. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Artist. He saw his crimes not as acts of violence, but as masterpieces. The Ripper's meticulous planning, the almost ritualistic nature of his victims, the baffling absence of any discernible pattern beyond the sheer audacity. It had always been about the craft, about the perfect execution. And now, here he was, perhaps orchestrating his grand finale. My eyes scanned the derelict warehouse, taking in the scattered crates, the skeletal remains of machinery draped in cobwebs. The scent of decay and damp earth was thick, cloying. He wasn't the hulking brute I'd imagined the Ripper to be. He was lean, wiry, his movements fluid, almost graceful. "I think I know me," he continued, his voice a venomous caress. "I think I understand what drives me, but I've only ever seen the surface, detective, the cheap theatrics, the messy bits. The Ripper's victims had been found with their bodies arranged in a grotesque tableau, a horrifying signature that had eluded every investigator. The Ripper had never been caught because no one had understood the why, and I, in my youthful arrogance, had been no different. I'd focused on the how, on the impossible logistics, on the sheer brutality. "The heists," I said, my mind racing. They weren't just distractions, they were rehearsals, practice runs for something bigger. He tilted his head, a predatory gleam in his unseen eyes. "Clever, Cole," I rev, finally starting to see the canvas. My gaze swept past him, towards the gaping maw of the warehouse's main entrance. A plane. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about escaping, about disappearing into the night. "Every artist needs an audience, but sometimes one must also seek a new gallery," he replied, his tone laced with amusement. "And this particular performance is reaching its crescendo." He gestured with the crowbar, not towards me, but towards the open bay. "I see, detective, the true beauty lies not in the act itself, but in the anticipation, in the knowledge that the stage is set, the players are in position, and the final curtain is about to fall." I needed to get out of here, to reach the authorities, to warn them, but he stood between me and the exit, a silent sentinel of chaos. I took a tentative step back, my eyes darting around for any advantage, any escape route. "I've been watching me, haven't I?" I challenged, trying to buy myself time to gauge his reaction. "And I, my dear detective, have always been such a compelling protagonist, so driven, so predictable." He took another step and I instinctively recoiled, my injured arm protesting. He noticed, a flicker of something satisfaction. "I think this is about the money, don't I?" He mused, his gaze drifting towards the distant lights. "Or the thrill of the chase, but I read wrong. This is about legacy, about leaving a mark that can never be erased." My mind churned, piecing together the fragments. The Ripper's victims, all from a similar demographic, all seemingly unconnected. But what if the connection wasn't to them, but to me? What if the Ripper wasn't just a killer, but a mirror, reflecting my own failures back at me? "Who are I?" I demanded, the question tearing from my throat. He paused, the engine's hum a counterpoint to the pounding in my chest. "I am the consequence, detective, the unfinished sentence." I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging, and sprinted towards the exit, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The roar of an engine intensified, a powerful guttural growl cutting through the air. A small twin-engine plane sat on a desolate stretch of tarmac, its lights extinguished, its engines already screaming their readiness. A figure was scrambling into the cockpit. I ran, my legs churning, the wind whipping at my face. I had to stop him. I had to finally, irrevocably, bring the ghost to justice. But as I closed the distance, a sickening realization washed over me. The figure climbing into the plane wasn't the Ripper. It was the accomplice, the one who had been guarding the warehouse. The Ripper was still here. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running, was no escape route. It was a stage, and the true horror was yet to unfold. The acrid smell of burnt fuel clawed at my throat. I burst from the warehouse door, the night air a sudden, violent slap against my face. The roar was deafening now, a predator's growl tearing through the stillness. Ahead the runway stretched, a sliver of improbable blackness against a starless sky. A sleek, dark shape, impossibly low to the ground, was already lifting, its engine screaming a primal challenge. My breath hitched. It was too fast, always too fast. I stumbled onto the cracked tarmac of the private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The wind whipped my jacket, a phantom caress of the night. The silhouette of the aircraft against the faint glow of distant city lights was a cruel mockery of escape. A single red light pulsed on its tail, a dying ember swallowed by the darkness. I strained my eyes, searching for any detail, any sign of the figure who had just slipped through my grasp. Nothing. Just the receding thunder of its departure and the metallic tang of fear in my mouth. My gaze swept the empty expanse of the airstrip, the abandoned fuel barrels, the rusted signpost listing no destination. This was it, the place. The audacity of it, staging this escape from under my nose, from a place I'd used as a temporary refuge. They knew I was onto them. They knew I was closing in, and they weren't afraid. I sank to my knees, the rough asphalt biting into my skin. It wasn't just about the heists anymore. It was about them toying with me, about them proving their superiority. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a message, and messages in this world always carried a price. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale oil and something else, something metallic and sharp. My eyes fell on the table where I'd been piecing together the fragmented clues. Papers were scattered, my half-eaten sandwich pushed aside, and then I saw it. A single, pristine white envelope lying dead center on the chaotic surface. It hadn't been there before. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The paper felt smooth, expensive. No return address, no markings, just a folded sheet inside. I pulled out the contents, a photograph. My stomach lurched. It was a picture of Sarah, my Sarah, not a recent photo but one from years ago from a happier time. He was laughing, her eyes crinkling at the corners, sunlight catching her auburn hair. Behind her, the familiar facade of the old bookstore we used to frequent. It was a stolen moment preserved in time, but it wasn't the innocence of the photo that sent a jolt of ice through me. It was the small, almost imperceptible detail scrawled on the back in that same precise, almost elegant hand I'd seen on the stolen artifacts. A reminder of what you've lost, Cole, and what you stand to lose again. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a game of cat and mouse anymore. This was personal. They knew about Sarah. They knew her significance. This wasn't about money or notoriety. This was about breaking me. They were threatening her. The thought was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. My carefully constructed walls, the ones I'd spent years reinforcing, began to crumble. I stared at the photograph, my vision blurring. Sarah. The one bright spot in the wreckage of my past. The one person who had always seen the good in me, even when I couldn't. The idea of her being in danger, of her becoming a pawn in this sick, twisted game, was unbearable. A frantic energy seized me. I needed to get to her. I needed to warn her, but how? They had made it clear they were watching. Every move I made, every step I took towards them could put her in greater peril. I paced the dusty floor of the warehouse, the photograph clutched in my hand. The engine's roar was a distant memory, replaced by the deafening roar of my own rising panic. I looked at the scattered papers, the timelines, the maps. The pattern of the heists, once a complex puzzle, now felt like a cruel roadmap leading directly to Sarah. They were escalating. They had moved from striking at institutions to striking at the very heart of my life. This was the ultimate gamble, the final, devastating play, and I had walked right into it. I had to be smart. I had to be careful. My mistakes had cost me everything once. I couldn't let that happen again. The stakes had just been raised, not just for me, but for the one person I still held dear. The air at the private airstrip, no lights, engine running, was thick with the metallic tang of aviation fuel, a scent that always made my teeth ache. It was the kind of night where the stars seemed too bright, too indifferent. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a stark white ghost against the ink-high blackness of the tarmac. The only illumination came from the weak, pulsing red beacon of a distant tower and the infernal glow of the twin engines on the waiting aircraft. It hummed with a restless energy, a predator poised for flight. They'd sent the message precisely as I'd suspected. A single, unmarked envelope slipped under my door, containing a photograph. Not of Sarah, not this time. It was a grainy, black and white image of the old clock tower in the city square, the one I'd spent countless sleepless nights staring at in my office, the one where he had left his calling card the first time. Beneath it, scrawled in that familiar, precise hand, were 3 words: "Meet me, midnight." Midnight was now, and this plane, this lonely sentinel on a forgotten strip of land, was my lure. My mind, a battlefield of old regrets and fresh anxieties, churned through possibilities. Sarah. The threat to her was the hook, the lever they were using to drag me back into this mire, but why Sarah? He was just a witness, a name whispered in the periphery of the original investigation. Unless she knew more than she let on, or perhaps more disturbingly, they believed she did. The gnawing doubt, a familiar companion, began to stir. Had I misread the original perpetrator's motives all those years ago? Had I been so blinded by my own desperate pursuit that I'd missed a crucial thread? This new series of heists, so eerily similar, felt like a taunt, a perverse echo of a past I couldn't outrun. And now they were using Sarah to ensure I didn't even try. A low rumble, distinct from the aircraft's steady thrum, sliced through the night. Headlights, two sharp pinpricks of white, cut through the darkness, approaching from the access road. My hand instinctively tightened around the worn grip of the revolver tucked beneath my coat. Not for protection, not really. It was a habit, a ghost limb reaching for a phantom weapon. The vehicle, a nondescript black sedan, glided to a halt 100 yards away. The engine died, plunging the immediate vicinity into a deeper silence. The driver's side door creaked open. This was it, the moment of truth. I'd set the trap with the precision of a surgeon, but the patient was a phantom. The intel I'd gleaned from the last heist, the specific type of lockpick used, the peculiar way the security camera feeds were looped, pointed to a singular, meticulous mind, a mind that reveled in its own cleverness, a mind that would, I gambled, be drawn to the theatricality of this rendezvous. They wanted an audience, or at least a witness to their grand finale. And I, the disgraced detective, was the only one left who could appreciate their artistry. The figure approached, their steps unnervingly silent on the gravel. The wind whipped a strand of hair across my face, and I brushed it away, my eyes locked on the approaching form. As they drew closer, the dim light from the distant tower began to catch the edges of their silhouette. They were of average height, perhaps wearing a long coat, nothing distinctive, nothing to betray the identity I craved, the identity that had haunted my dreams for years. "Cole," a voice called out, surprisingly clear, carrying on the night air. It was smooth, cultured, laced with an unnerving calm. My own voice, when I finally spoke, was a rough rasp. "I know my name." A low chuckle. "Of course. Rather famous, aren't I? Or infamous, depending on who I ask." The figure stopped about 20 feet away. "I've been waiting for Cole. I arranged this," I stated, my gaze sweeping the empty expanse of the airstrip. No backup. No escape routes readily apparent beyond the tarmac. Just the hum of the engines, a constant, low-grade thrum of impending departure. "I knew I'd come." Predictable, the voice replied, a hint of amusement coloring the words. "Driven by guilt, driven by a need for redemption, and it seems driven by a rather unfortunate attachment." The mention of Sarah hung in the air, a palpable threat. "Leave her out of this." "But she's so central to my current predicament, isn't she? The fragile thread I cling to." I merely nudged it. I took a step forward, my hand inching closer to the concealed weapon. "What do I want?" "The game is nearly over, Cole. I simply wanted to ensure I understood the rules and the stakes." The figure gestured vaguely towards the waiting plane. "A clean slate, a new beginning for both of us." A new beginning, the words tasted like ash. This wasn't about a new beginning, this was about an ending, and I was determined to be the one to write it. The trap was sprung, but the prey was still a ghost. And ghosts, I knew, were the hardest to catch. The air at the private airstrip, no lights, engine running, tasted like a promise of escape, thin and metallic. The roar of the idling engine was a beast breathing, waiting to be unleashed. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the vast, star-dusted silence. This was it. The culmination of every wrong turn, every sleepless night, every whisper of doubt that had clung to me like grave dirt. The silhouette against the faint glow of the runway lights was unmistakable. Lean, coiled, a predator at bay. He hadn't tried to hide. Not anymore. The mask was off, or rather, it had never truly been on. It was a sound that had burrowed into my memory, a phantom limb I'd been trying to ignore for years. I took a step forward, the gravel crunching under my worn soles. "You always did like to put on a show," I replied, my voice rough, unused to the sharp edge of confrontation. The stolen jewels, the impossible access, the sheer audacity of it all, it was a symphony of chaos, conducted by a madman. Or perhaps, just a man who saw the world with a clarity I'd lost, a grand exit. My eyes scanned the perimeter, searching for any sign of a trap, any hint of a diversion. The stillness was unnerving, too still. The engine's thrumming felt like a heartbeat, each pulse a countdown, a weapon, of course. "This isn't an exit," I countered, my gaze locking onto his. "It's a surrender," I cornered. He tilted his head, a subtle movement that spoke volumes. Am I, or have I simply led I to where I wanted I all along? He took a step towards me, his movements fluid, almost languid. All those years, Cole, I chased ghosts, phantoms. I saw patterns where there were none. I built a narrative around a man who was never there. The words hit me like a physical blow. Had I? The faces of the victims flashed behind my eyes, their stories etched into my soul. They weren't ghosts. I growled, the anger a hot ember in my chest. They were real, and I was the one pulling the strings. He stopped, a few yards separating us. The wind picked up, whipping around the fuselage, carrying the scent of aviation fuel and distant rain. The strings, Cole, or the threads, so delicate, so easily manipulated. I see the grand design, the meticulous planning. I attribute it to a single mastermind. But what if it was simply opportunity? What if the world presented itself and I merely responded? My hand instinctively moved towards my own side, feeling the familiar weight of my service weapon, a ghost of its former self. But I didn't draw it. Not yet. This was more than a gunfight. This was a dismantling. Opportunity doesn't leave bodies in its wake. I spat, the truth of it burning my tongue. A shadow of something unreadable flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that unsettling calm. And what is a body, Cole, but a vessel? An empty shell, the true essence, the story. That's what lingers, that's what leaves its mark. And I, my dear detective, have left my mark on this city. He took another step, and this time his hand moved, not towards the weapon but to his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It glinted in the faint light. My breath caught. I knew that locket. I'd seen it in the evidence photos, a detail that had always bothered me, a piece that didn't fit the narrative I'd constructed. I think I understand my motives, he answered, his voice softer now, almost melancholic. I think this is about greed or power or some grand, twisted game. But I read wrong, Cole. I've always been wrong. He opened the locket. Inside, 2 faded photographs, a woman smiling, a child beaming. My gaze snapped to his face, searching for a flicker of recognition, a crack in the facade, and then I saw it. A ghost of a memory, a forgotten echo. The woman, the child. The pilot, unseen, was growing impatient. It's about remembrance, about making sure certain stories aren't forgotten. You of all people should understand that. He snapped the locket shut. The sound was sharp, decisive. And in that instant I understood, not everything, not yet, but enough. The meticulous planning, the seemingly random targets. It wasn't random at all. It was a twisted form of memorial. My hand finally closed around the cool metal of my weapon. The tension in the air was a tangible thing, a coiled spring ready to snap. He was waiting. And I was finally ready to face not just the perpetrator, but the ghost that had haunted me for so long. The ghost of my own failure. The ghost of a truth I'd refused to see. The roar of the engine intensified, a hungry beast ready to devour the night. The locket snapped shut, a punctuation mark in the suffocating quiet of the warehouse. A sound so small, yet it echoed with the weight of years. My fingers, still slick with something I didn't want to name, tightened around the cold metal. He'd laid it all out, piece by agonizing piece, like a macabre puzzle. The stolen artifacts, the targeted locations, the chilling precision, all echoes of a ghost I tried to bury. He'd called it a memorial. A twisted, grotesque homage to the lives he'd extinguished, the ones I'd failed to save. Each object a silent scream, each heist a desperate, theatrical flourish for an audience of one. Me. Now the ghost was real, breathing the same stale air, its shadow stretching long and distorted in the dim, flickering emergency lights. He stood across the cavernous space, a silhouette against the grime-streaked windows, his shoulders slumped not in defeat, but in a profound, weary sadness. I understand now. The stranger's voice was a low murmur, stripped of its earlier bravado. It wasn't about the money, not truly. My own voice felt rusty, unused. It was about making me remember. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. And I did. I always do, don't I, Cole? The one who carries the weight, the weight. It had been a constant companion, a leaden cloak I couldn't shed. He'd been right there all along, a master puppeteer pulling strings from the periphery, a phantom I couldn't quite grasp. The faint whine of an engine grew louder, cutting through the heavy air, a low thrumming that vibrated in my bones. Outside, beyond the rusted corrugated walls, a single beacon of light pierced the inky blackness. A hurried departure, I observed, my gaze flicking towards the distant glow. "He doesn't linger," the stranger said, his eyes fixed on the same point. "He never does." The sound of sirens, distant at first, began to swell, a mournful chorus joining the engine's song. The game was ending, the final act playing out under a sky that offered no solace. "I could have stopped this years ago," I stated, the accusation hanging heavy between us. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not malice but a mirror of my own exhaustion. "And I could have caught me. We both played our parts, Cole, the hunter and the haunted." He gestured vaguely with a hand that trembled slightly. This was just the final scene, a desperate attempt to tie up loose ends, my loose ends. My mind raced, piecing together the final fragments. The informant who'd fed me misinformation, the anonymous tips that had led me astray, the subtle misdirections that had always kept the true architect of chaos just out of reach. It was all so clear now. The sirens were closer now, their wail a frantic, insistent pulse. The engine's roar intensified, a promise of escape. "Why now?" I asked, the question clawing its way out of my throat. He offered a faint, sad smile. "Because the stage was set, the props were in place, and I was tired of the performance." He took a step towards the exit, his movement still surprisingly fluid. "But Cole, I rather one who has to live with the memory, make it mean something." I watched him go, a ghost dissolving into the encroaching dawn. The locket, still warm in my palm, felt like a brand. He hadn't sought to destroy me, but to implicate me, to make me a part of his twisted legacy. And in a way, he had succeeded. The first police car screeched to a halt outside, its headlights slicing through the gloom. A colleague, his face etched with worry, emerged from the driver's side, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Cole, what in God's name?" I didn't answer immediately. The engine's roar had faded, replaced by the cacophony of approaching sirens. The air thrummed with the finality of it all. The stranger was gone, swallowed by the night. The case, the one that had haunted my dreams for years, was finally closed. But the resolution felt less like victory and more like a surrender. I held up the locket, its polished surface reflecting the flashing blue and red lights. "It's over," I said, my voice raspy. "It's finally over." But as I looked at the faces of the arriving officers, their expressions a mixture of relief and confusion, I knew my own personal resolution was still a long way off. The weight was still there, a familiar ache in my chest. He had brought his performance to an end, but my own struggle with the echoes of his crimes had just begun. My gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first tentative rays of dawn were beginning to paint the sky. A new day. A chance to start again, perhaps. To find a way to carry the weight without being crushed by it. To make it a testament to the lives lost, and to the long, arduous road towards healing. The locket, a tangible piece of his twisted art, felt heavy in my hand, a constant reminder of the ghost I had finally faced, and the long, quiet journey of reckoning that lay ahead. Then, a distinct sound broke through the rising din of the approaching authorities. A low, guttural roar growing rapidly in volume, not from the sirens, but from the direction of the distant light. It was the unmistakable sound of an aircraft engine, pushed to its absolute limit. I looked towards the private airstrip, no lights, engine running. He hadn't just escaped the warehouse, he'd escaped the country. A colleague rushed to my side, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Cole, did I see him? Did I get him?" I watched the aircraft shrink, a tiny, defiant speck against the vast canvas of the sky. The case was closed, yes. The weight in my chest shifted, transforming from the burden of a solved case to the sharp, bitter sting of unfinished business. The resolution was a mirage, and the long night, I suspected, was far from over.